Think you really know Rick Harrison? The approachable, history-loving, always smiling guy from Pawn Stars? Think again. What the FBI uncovered at his luxurious mansion is far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. This is no longer about collectibles, historic items, or vintage deals. This is now a story of secrets, dark, shocking secrets, that Rick Harrison has kept buried for years. Secrets that the world can no longer ignore. Are you prepared for the truth? Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear will forever change how you see Rick Harrison, the man who turned old treasures into a televised empire. Once admired for his charm and expertise, Rick Harrison is now at the center of an intense and chilling federal investigation. For years, he operated a successful pawn shop that brought him wealth and national fame. But now, the FBI has stepped in, launching a full-blown investigation into his murky dealings. Yet no one, not the authorities, not his fans, not even those closest to him, could have foreseen what was truly hidden within the walls of his grand estate. What started as a probe into suspicious financial activities quickly spiraled into something far more terrifying. When FBI agents entered Rick Harrison's mansion, they anticipated shady financial records, suspect business contracts, or signs of fraud. Instead, what they discovered was utterly unthinkable. 25 human bodies, each concealed in different parts of the property. Some were hidden in secret compartments, others buried discreetly on the grounds, and even more were uncovered in the shadowy recesses of the vast home. The man once celebrated for his antique expertise and composed TV persona is now linked to a horror story no one was prepared for. How could this happen? How could a man whose public image was built on charm and historic artifacts be connected to such a gruesome reality? To understand the truth, we must dig deeper, beyond the facade, beyond the staged deals, and beyond the camera lights. We must ask, who is Rick Harrison, really? What's been hiding behind the wealth and the fame that captivated millions? At first glance, Rick Harrison appeared to be the last person you'd suspect of heinous crimes. He won hearts with his calm wit and extensive knowledge. Millions watched Pawn Stars, drawn to his quirky humor and love for rare items. He wasn't just a businessman, he was living proof of the American dream, transforming a small pawn shop into a household name. But behind the scenes, behind the fame and fortune, was a much darker narrative taking shape. It turns out, success wasn't enough for Rick Harrison. Whispers of a darker persona had long been dismissed as baseless gossip. But once the federal agents started to investigate more thoroughly, the whispers began to make chilling sense. What they uncovered wasn't just a web of financial deception. It was a waking nightmare, hiding in plain sight, just beyond the public's adoration. As the investigation progressed, the FBI peeled back layer after layer of Rick Harrison's life, revealing a trail of bizarre and deeply troubling events. The evidence pointed to a sinister connection between his well-known pawn business and a shadowy world of underground dealings. Even more disturbing was the gradual transformation in Harrison himself, a man once admired, now seemingly consumed by darkness. What started as a case of financial misconduct quickly evolved into a story of concealed horror. Federal agents realized that Rick Harrison's pawn shop had been more than a place to trade antiques. It had been a smokescreen, a convenient front for a maze of illegal operations tied to criminal enterprises that few could have ever imagined. The mansion, once a symbol of success, had turned into a crime scene filled with unimaginable brutality. The 25 bodies discovered were not victims of random acts. Their deaths followed a calculated, horrifying pattern, a blueprint of terror hidden for years right under everyone's noses. The investigation went beyond bank statements and spreadsheets. Agents followed lead after lead, each one exposing a darker truth. One by one, these clues linked Rick Harrison to a number of unsolved disappearances. With each revelation, the image of the smart, successful businessman began to crumble. In its place stood a man who had, it seems, built an entire empire not just on negotiation and collectibles, but on deceit, control, and perhaps murder. The biggest question remains: how could someone so deeply admired, so publicly visible, hide such a monstrous secret for so long? How could he maintain the persona of a clever, kind, and entertaining businessman, all while leading what now appears to be a chilling double life? The answer may lie in the very nature of the empire he built, its size, its influence, and the trust it inspired. As the investigation unraveled, it became increasingly clear. This wasn't just a criminal case, but a cultural jolt. A once celebrated figure now stands accused of unspeakable acts. The shock didn't just come from the discovery of the victims. It came from the realization that this darkness had been so well hidden, for so long, from so many. Rick Harrison managed to keep the truth concealed not only from fans and the media, but even from those closest to him, his family, his friends, and his inner circle. No one suspected that behind the smile and signature smirk of a beloved TV personality was a man with secrets darker than anyone dared to imagine. As the investigation peeled back the layers of deception, Rick Harrison's carefully crafted public image began to unravel. Once adored by fans as a friendly face on television, he now stood accused of being something much darker, a cold-blooded predator hiding in plain sight. Each new piece of evidence tore away at the public's perception of him, transforming the admired icon into a disturbing figure. Rick Harrison, who once basked in the limelight of the hit series Pawn Stars, has now become the center of a disturbing and complex investigation. What the FBI unearthed went far beyond a simple murder case. It exposed deeply buried secrets that had been festering behind his seemingly flawless public life. The admired reputation he once held turned out to be nothing more than a sophisticated mask concealing unspeakable horrors. As agents continued to uncover the truth, the narrative shifted from a story about a fallen businessman to that of a man who had manipulated everyone around him while concealing chilling crimes. When the public learned of the disturbing truth behind Rick Harrison, the nation was left in disbelief. How could someone who appeared so genuine and lovable on television have kept such horrific secrets for so long? This very question has haunted the minds of millions, leaving them grappling with the disturbing reality that sometimes the most terrifying truths wear the friendliest faces. Rick Harrison didn't begin his journey as the public figure we know today. Like many aspiring entrepreneurs, he started small, with nothing but ambition and a dream. Born in 1965, Rick came from modest beginnings. Raised in North Carolina, he later moved to Las Vegas, a city of both dazzling opportunity and brutal competition. For someone like Rick, surviving in such an unforgiving environment required more than just luck. It demanded a sharp mind and relentless determination. As a young man, Rick Harrison discovered the pawn business and began carving out a future in a world most people overlooked. What began as a humble storefront selling whatever could turn a quick profit slowly grew into something more. Although it started off as just another pawn shop in downtown Las Vegas, Rick had much bigger plans. He wasn't satisfied with running an average business. He wanted to build something memorable, something that would stand out in a sea of competitors. Rick had a passion for uncovering value in things others dismissed. From rare antiques to historical memorabilia, he saw potential where others saw junk. His growing knowledge and sharp evaluation skills soon became his calling card. The little pawn shop began to attract more attention, not just because of what it sold, but because of Rick's unique ability to see what others couldn't. His understanding of the historical value behind objects brought a sense of intrigue that few in the business could match. But it wasn't just knowledge that set Rick Harrison apart. It was his versatility. He knew that a pawn shop was more than a quick cash hub. It was a hidden archive of the past. Rick began acquiring all sorts of rare items, from ancient coins to priceless documents, eventually earning a reputation as a treasure hunter with an unmatched eye for detail. His breakthrough came in 2009, when television producers approached him with a concept for a reality show that would document the inner workings of a family-run pawn business. The show became known as Pawn Stars, and it changed everything. What started as a behind-the-scenes look at quirky transactions soon transformed into a global phenomenon. Audiences were captivated not just by the fascinating objects, but by the personalities involved. Especially Rick Harrison, whose historical insight and dry wit made him an instant fan favorite. The series launched Rick into stardom, turning his once modest shop into an international destination and establishing his family as pop culture icons. As the show's popularity soared, Rick Harrison was no longer just a business owner. He became a household name. His appearances expanded beyond the shop. He was invited onto talk shows, featured in magazines, and even appeared in films. But with fame came new challenges. Rick Harrison was now more than the face of a small pawn shop. He was the symbol of a successful brand. The public admired him, businesses respected him, and fans loved him. However, behind the scenes, the pressures of maintaining this perfect image began to mount. While the world saw the polished exterior, no one knew about the darkness festering beneath the surface. Despite his success, Rick Harrison's story took a shocking turn, one that the cameras never captured. Beneath the fame and fortune was a chilling truth, a web of secrets more horrifying than anyone could have predicted. When those secrets were finally revealed, the world had to face a deeply unsettling reality. The man they thought they knew was never real. Sometimes the most familiar faces conceal the darkest souls. What started as a small reality show soon became a cultural juggernaut. Millions tuned in weekly to witness the unusual trades and negotiations at the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, run by Rick Harrison, his father Richard Old Man Harrison, his son Corey Big Hoss Harrison, and their quirky friend Chumley. While the antiques and odd items drew attention, it was the chemistry and charisma of the cast, especially Rick, that kept viewers hooked. His calm demeanor, keen historical knowledge, and signature dry humor turned him into an icon. He wasn't just a businessman. To many fans, he was a trusted figure, someone they felt they knew. The unexpected success of Pawn Stars elevated Rick Harrison to millionaire status, with his shop becoming an internationally recognized landmark. But with every new opportunity came added pressure. Rick was no longer the underdog. He was now a brand, expected to maintain perfection at every step. But no amount of fame could keep the truth hidden forever. Behind the curtain of television magic and public admiration, a storm had been brewing for years. And once that storm broke, it changed everything. The constant demand to uphold a pristine public image, expand his business empire, and keep viewers engaged in the cutthroat world of reality television began to take a toll on Rick Harrison. While everything appeared to be running smoothly on the surface, whispers of controversy began to circulate. Former employees of Rick started questioning the carefully crafted persona he displayed on camera and the actual reality that lay behind the pawn shop's doors. Suspicions of unethical behavior and internal turmoil began gaining traction. Despite his ever-present smile for the media, there was a darkness growing beneath Rick's polished exterior. Slowly, the hidden truth began to seep through the cracks. As Pawn Stars reached new heights of popularity, a chain of subtle yet alarming incidents started to unfold. A discreet phone call, an anonymous message to law enforcement, a quiet warning that failed to raise red flags. One small moment lit the fuse that would eventually ignite a full-scale FBI investigation. From that moment, the real and chilling world of Rick Harrison came into focus. The man once celebrated by millions was now entangled in a harrowing criminal probe. The secrets Rick had fought so hard to conceal were being unearthed piece by piece, dismantling his image as a successful entrepreneur and devoted family man in a way no one could have anticipated. Initially, law enforcement had no clue they were dealing with a serial killer. In fact, the investigation didn't even start with that suspicion. It began as a routine financial audit of the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, the business that had turned Rick Harrison into a household name. Federal agents uncovered inconsistencies in the shop's financial records, missing entries, suspicious transactions, and unaccounted funds that aroused concern. At first, it looked like a typical case of financial misconduct, something that could be resolved with a few depositions and some financial paperwork. But what followed shattered any normal expectations. The investigation took a dark turn when the FBI's organized crime unit got involved. Rumors of Rick's ties to criminal networks began to swirl. Allegations emerged, ranging from illegal trafficking of historical artifacts to involvement with underground crime syndicates. The sudden rise of the pawn shop's success, especially in tandem with Rick's growing fame, raised more questions than it answered. Investigators wondered why a pawn shop had possession of rare historical items, some of which were reportedly stolen from museums. The deeper the FBI dug, the more disturbing the reality became. Their findings suggested they weren't merely dealing with financial crimes, but were unearthing a web of transnational illegal activity. Individuals connected to Rick Harrison were placed under surveillance, and a vast criminal network began to unfold. One involving international mafias, black market traffickers, and looters of ancient relics. Yet the most horrifying discovery came not from the pawn shop's books, but from Rick's private residence. After months of meticulous surveillance, authorities launched a raid on Rick Harrison's lavish mansion. once known as a hotspot for celebrities and reality TV gatherings. What they found during that operation shook even the most seasoned investigators. The estate wasn't just a luxurious home. It served as a cache, a covert meeting point, and, most horrifyingly, a clandestine graveyard. The raid carved its own place in the dark annals of FBI history. Agents had expected to uncover stolen antiquities or confidential documents, but what they discovered was far more sinister. They stumbled upon architectural anomalies, hidden chambers unmarked on the blueprints, fortified doors, and unlit passageways. In one shadowed hallway, they entered an eerie basement that led to their first gruesome find, a body, so badly decomposed that it was beyond recognition. Then came the second, and the third. Eventually, 25 corpses were uncovered, each stashed in separate concealed sections of the house, each murdered long ago. Every burial was methodical, deliberate. This was no random act. This was calculated horror. Rick Harrison was no longer seen as a quirky TV star or savvy entrepreneur. The investigation had unraveled a living nightmare. From laundering money and smuggling priceless relics to orchestrating a sequence of brutal murders within the confines of a luxurious home, Rick's story evolved into one of the most disturbing criminal cases in recent American history. It wasn't just about breaking the law. It was about shattering the illusion of a public figure millions had welcomed into their homes. When agents launched the raid, they weren't merely seeking evidence of financial deception. They were stepping into something infinitely darker. A haunting question hung in the air. How many lives had ended inside those walls, and why? It all began unraveling after an unmarked shipping crate was delivered to the mansion, a seemingly innocuous delivery that set off internal alarms. For months, the FBI had been working undercover, accumulating evidence on Rick Harrison, his illegal transactions, his suspected affiliations with criminal rings. The pattern was always strange. High-value items constantly flowed through the pawn shop, most without any traceable origin. Yet it was only when attention turned to Rick's estate that the true horror began to surface. The mansion, once a symbol of success, became a grotesque puzzle. Lavishly decorated rooms hid more than just antiques and luxury. They concealed horror. Some areas of the home were strictly off-limits, not only to guests, but even to those closest to Rick. That alone raised suspicion. As investigators stepped into the mansion's shadowy lower levels, they found themselves navigating narrow, suffocating corridors thick with dust and silence. Eventually, they reached a heavy wooden door, its paint flaking, its hinges rusted. The moment they forced it open, they were hit with a sickening stench, the unmistakable odor of death. The air inside the hidden room was thick with the unmistakable stench of death. As the FBI agents stepped into the darkness, the foul smell hit them hard, an overwhelming wave of decay and rot. There, lying in the shadows, was the first body. It had decomposed so extensively that identification was impossible at first glance. Forensic experts would later determine that the man had likely been dead for many months, possibly even longer. But it wasn't just the condition of the corpse that disturbed the agents. It was the calculated way in which the body had been concealed. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, hidden as though someone wanted it found eventually. Room by room, a horror story unfolded. Rather than stacks of illegal merchandise or stolen goods, the agents found a grotesque trail of death. The bodies were everywhere. Some were skeletal remains barely intact. Others were shockingly well preserved. But what united them all was one terrifying fact. These weren't random deaths. They were part of a deliberate and sustained killing spree. Victims were discovered in places no one would ever expect, wedged into closet walls, beneath floorboards, embedded inside wall niches, even in rooms that Rick Harrison himself used regularly. His private office, his personal library. It was as if he had been living among them, coexisting with the victims of his own darkness. What truly horrified investigators was the methodical nature of the placements. Each body had been arranged with precision, reflecting a sinister order rather than chaos. There was no panic, no sloppiness, only cold intention. This raised disturbing questions. Were the killings driven by compulsion or control? Was this the result of a deranged mind following a twisted code? Forensics teams worked around the clock to determine the causes of death. Some bodies showed brutal signs of physical torture, blunt trauma, deep lacerations, and clear evidence of struggle. Others revealed quiet deaths, mysterious toxins in their systems, suggesting calculated poisonings. These were not crimes of opportunity. They were premeditated acts of cold-blooded murder. To date, 25 bodies have been discovered within the mansion grounds, and the count continues to grow. Some victims had personal links to Rick Harrison, while others appeared to be total strangers, people who, perhaps by chance or by fate, were caught in the web of his violence. Some seem to have been deliberately selected, while others may have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Investigators are left grasping at the one question that haunts every corner of this case. Why? Was this the fallout of Harrison's involvement in a criminal underworld, or a horrifying manifestation of something far more personal and sinister? As the probe expanded, it became increasingly evident that Rick Harrison had been leading a terrifying double life. Behind the glitz of fame and success, he had hidden a reality that no one could have ever predicted. The estate that once symbolized luxury and celebrity was now ground zero for one of the darkest investigations in recent American history. The FBI soon realized they weren't dealing with an ordinary serial killer hiding in the shadows. This was a man who had mastered the art of deception, a public figure with millions of fans, a celebrated TV personality living in the open while burying secrets in the walls of his home. Rick Harrison, the man who had transformed a humble pawn shop into a reality television empire, had now become the central figure in a criminal case that rocked the nation to its core. As details emerged, a shocking duality came into view: the charming public figure versus the hidden monster within. Inside the mansion, investigators found all 25 victims spread across multiple locations. Some bodies were tucked into hidden rooms, others were buried beneath ornate flooring or behind sealed panels. But despite the overwhelming evidence, the most pressing question remained unanswered. What was the motive? Why would Harrison commit these gruesome acts? From the earliest days of the investigation, it was clear he wasn't a passive participant. The bodies were hidden with care, the kind of meticulous effort only someone deeply involved could execute. Harrison, long known for his expert eye for valuable artifacts, had apparently used that same attention to detail to mask the aftermath of his crimes. Each body had its own designated hiding place, spaced out in a manner that suggested long-term planning. The timeline of the murders began to form, and as investigators worked through it, a pattern of cold, calculated violence emerged. This wasn't random. It was precise. The murders were part of something larger, something even more horrifying than they first imagined. The deeper the FBI dug, the clearer it became that Rick Harrison's life of crime wasn't limited to murder alone. His name surfaced in connections to major criminal operations, smuggling rings, money laundering schemes, and links to powerful international crime networks. What they uncovered painted a picture of a man whose public persona had been a calculated disguise. Behind the scenes, Harrison operated in a shadow world filled with illegal deals, rare stolen items, and black market trade. His famous pawn shop wasn't just a place for quirky deals and historical artifacts, it was a hub for criminal activity. One of the biggest breakthroughs came from a set of encrypted communications found on Harrison's personal electronics. These messages outlined not only illegal activities, but detailed plans for eliminating people who posed threats to his operations. In these conversations, he appeared not as a desperate man covering up mistakes, but as a strategic manipulator orchestrating a chilling series of killings. It soon became apparent that the pawn shop was more than a business. It was a meeting ground for criminals operating in the black market. They trusted Harrison, believed in his ability to keep transactions hidden, and many of the bodies found were closely tied to these underground dealings. Some victims were associates who got too close. Others were considered liabilities. Whether through betrayal, threat, or simply knowing too much, they had become expendable. A terrifying narrative began to take shape. This wasn't a case of financial gain alone. It was about power, control, the absolute domination of anyone who dared challenge the empire Rick Harrison had built. Victims were silenced through threats, blackmail, and ultimately death. The goal was simple: protect the illusion, maintain the empire, eliminate all risk. Eventually, the full extent of the horror came to light. Rick Harrison wasn't just a con artist or smuggler. He was a cold, calculating predator, someone who had murdered without remorse to preserve his power and reputation. These killings weren't rushed, they weren't impulsive. Each one was meticulously executed, devoid of emotion, and hidden with eerie calm. The smiling reality TV star the world had adored was nothing more than a facade. Behind it was a man capable of unspeakable evil. It wasn't just about money or guarding trade secrets. As the FBI broadened their investigation, they made chilling discoveries inside the luxurious mansion. Hidden rooms that hinted at motives far more disturbing and layered than anyone had initially suspected. These dark truths are still being unearthed. Rick Harrison had meticulously maintained bizarre files, collections of notes, photographs, and even personal items belonging to his victims. These records slowly pieced together a horrifying picture. A man who judged others solely on how they could be used to fulfill his ruthless ambitions. Harrison seemed to keep a twisted scorecard, filled with deceit, shady agreements, and names of individuals who dared to oppose him. Psychological evaluations conducted during the probe revealed a cold, calculated personality. Despite appearing friendly and approachable, a seasoned expert in antiques, Harrison was hiding a sinister side. Beneath that calm, well-spoken image was a manipulative killer who didn't hesitate to destroy anyone threatening the empire he had built, using fear, coercion, and murder as his tools. As investigators peeled back the layers, they began to understand the full extent of what they were dealing with. Rick Harrison wasn't just committing isolated crimes, he was orchestrating them. He was the brains behind an expansive criminal operation, using his charm and financial influence to lead an underground empire. Surrounding himself with silent accomplices, most too terrified to break their silence, Harrison kept his darkest secrets locked away, both within the walls of his home and beneath the surface of the persona he had spent years perfecting. As the FBI delved deeper, it became clear. Harrison wasn't a cog in a larger criminal wheel. He was the wheel. He was the mastermind behind a bloody network fueled by lies and carefully masked brutality. Then came the bombshell. When the public first learned that Rick Harrison, the well-known face from Pawn Stars, was under FBI investigation, disbelief swept the nation. No one could have imagined what was hidden behind the mask of a man celebrated as a symbol of the American dream. For years, Harrison had been admired. A self-made success story, charming TV personality, and savvy businessman. But when federal agents stormed his estate and found the remains of 25 victims, that illusion shattered. His image crumbled overnight. The man who once represented integrity and knowledge was now the central figure in one of the most harrowing criminal cases in recent memory. At first, many refused to accept the truth. People clung to memories of Harrison as a thoughtful history buff and honest dealer. They dismissed the revelations as a smear campaign. But as the evidence mounted, denial became impossible. This wasn't some random series of events. This was a premeditated, years-long scheme. The victims weren't accidents. They were part of a calculated plan. People who posed a threat to Harrison's empire were silenced, methodically removed. His control over information and mastery of public perception allowed him to operate in the shadows for years, undetected. When the truth finally exploded into the public eye, the consequences were swift and brutal. Pawn Stars, the show that launched Harrison to fame, was abruptly shut down, not just because of the scandal, but because the figure at its heart was now seen as a villain. Episodes once seen as entertaining were suddenly tainted with horror. Viewers felt betrayed. To them, Rick Harrison had stood for wisdom and honesty. Now he was a symbol of deception that had lingered in plain sight for far too long. The fallout extended beyond television. Rick Harrison's personal business, the once thriving Harrison Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, suffered greatly. A store once filled with eager customers was now eerily quiet. The community's trust had vanished. Where people had once seen a brilliant antique appraiser, they now saw someone capable of unspeakable cruelty. Harrison had once been a shining example of expertise and charm. Now he was viewed as a manipulator, a fraud, and a criminal. His carefully constructed world came crashing down, and there was no recovering from it. The damage was permanent, the cost irreversible. As days passed, Harrison's private life fell apart as well. Friends and colleagues who once stood by him began to walk away. Some were devastated. Others questioned how well they ever really knew him. The man once praised for his business genius was now seen as a predator who had weaponized his influence to hide monstrous truths. Even his family wasn't immune to the wreckage. His son, Corey Big Hoss Harrison, became a magnet for public suspicion. Though no direct evidence connected Corey to his father's crimes, the bloodline alone drew scrutiny. A family that had once appeared tightly knit was now crumbling under the weight of Rick Harrison's misdeeds. The wealth Harrison once flaunted was now worthless. He had fallen from grace, no longer a respected figure, but a disgraced man shackled by the consequences of his own horrific choices. He had constructed his life on deceit, and now he was exposed, forced to face a reality built on lies. As the FBI investigation continued, more horrifying layers emerged. The bodies, the secretive associates, the hidden compartments in his mansion. These were just the surface. The deeper agents dug, the clearer it became that Rick Harrison had masterminded an intricate criminal web, one not confined to a single business but spanning a dark empire of violence and greed. Forensic teams worked endlessly to identify the victims. While some names were confirmed, others remained unknown. Still, one pattern became obvious. The victims weren't random. They were people tied to Harrison's underground operations, either directly involved or those who had learned too much and posed a risk. What appeared to be a simple pawn shop was, in reality, a hub for illegal dealings. Behind the antique displays were layers of criminal activity, money laundering, trafficking, and smuggling of black market goods. Among the most shocking discoveries were encrypted communications between Harrison and prominent criminal figures, confirming that he wasn't just participating, he was orchestrating everything. The man once known as a charming TV personality and antique connoisseur was now the face of one of the darkest scandals in American media. Rick Harrison, once loved and trusted by millions, had become a living nightmare hidden in plain sight. The FBI's investigation into Rick Harrison's pawn shop unearthed a disturbing truth. Many of the items sold there had not been obtained legally. Instead, they were traced back to thefts from museums, private collectors, and even the estates of deceased individuals. Authorities began to suspect that the pawn shop served as a cover for more sinister operations. Behind its innocent storefront, Rick Harrison was allegedly laundering money, passing off stolen artifacts as if they were acquired through legitimate means. But this initial discovery was only the surface. As federal agents delved deeper into the case, they stumbled upon an even darker revelation: a hidden collection inside Harrison's personal residence. Inside this secret stash were deeply personal belongings of his victims, family photos, jewelry, and clothing, all kept as grim souvenirs of his heinous crimes. These items weren't just stolen, they were trophies, chronicling the lives he had violently taken. Among the most chilling finds was a concealed room in his mansion, a chamber cloaked in secrecy and filled with bizarre antiques and relics. Mixed in were items tied directly to his victims, suggesting a disturbing ritual of remembrance. This hidden space was no ordinary storage area. It resembled a shrine to his crimes, meticulously organized, each artifact cataloged with precision. Rick Harrison appeared to have documented every murder, keeping a record not just of the objects, but of the lives he had extinguished. This obsessive collection painted a grim portrait of a man who not only killed, but seemed to cherish the memories of his victims in a deeply twisted way. As the FBI assembled their findings, the truth became undeniable. Rick Harrison, once a beloved TV personality and successful businessman, was actually the architect of a deadly criminal network. The friendly persona he projected on television had been a well-crafted illusion. Beneath the surface, he was ruthless, manipulative, and willing to kill to maintain his empire. Investigators uncovered a man with two identities. On one hand, a charismatic public figure with sharp business instincts. On the other, a manipulative murderer desperate to conceal his brutal secrets. The charm and confidence viewers admired were merely a mask. The FBI had pulled it away, revealing the darkness lurking beneath. When news of Harrison's secret life broke, it sent shockwaves across the world. Media outlets around the globe descended upon Las Vegas, focusing their lenses on his now notorious mansion, which had become a disturbing symbol of deception and violence. Every hour brought new, horrifying information, grisly details that left the public stunned. Among the most horrifying developments was the discovery of 25 hidden bodies, all located at different sites within the property. The sheer scope of Rick Harrison's criminal activities stunned the public. The methods he employed, the lengths he went to, and the cold calculation with which he committed these acts were beyond comprehension. His name became synonymous with betrayal. Social media platforms exploded with outrage. Hashtags featuring his name trended globally. People debated endlessly how someone so admired could be capable of such evil. Special news programs aired night after night, breaking down each development and dissecting his carefully maintained cover. Many couldn't believe it. The betrayal was personal. For years, Rick Harrison had been a fixture in many homes through his television presence. Viewers had trusted him, admired him, even celebrated him. And now, they were confronted with the possibility that the man they had cheered for was, in truth, a monster. The line between celebrity and criminal blurred, and the case began to resemble something out of a psychological thriller. Social media intensified the frenzy, as users created memes, posted shocking reactions, and speculated on every detail. The case had become more than just a criminal investigation. It was now a worldwide phenomenon. People were glued to updates, unable to look away from the nightmare unfolding in real time. The betrayal felt by fans turned into a collective trauma. They had celebrated a man who, in secret, harbored a terrifying double life. The revelations surrounding Rick Harrison challenged everything people believed about him. How could a man who built a successful television franchise around a family business also be responsible for such brutal crimes? How could a father and a respected employer hide such evil tendencies? These questions became louder when attention shifted toward those closest to him, his wife, his son, and his co-workers. The FBI's findings shook the public even more when it became clear that Rick had spent years working closely with his son, Corey "Big Hoss" Harrison. Many asked, could Corey really have been unaware of what his father was doing, or did he choose not to see it? The press focused heavily on Corey, demanding answers. In interviews, Corey appeared broken, his expressions reflecting anger, confusion, and heartbreak. He claimed ignorance, describing the news as a devastating betrayal. He extended condolences to the victims' families and said he no longer recognized the man he once looked up to. But public sympathy for Corey Harrison was short-lived. As media coverage intensified, skepticism grew. Could someone so close truly be oblivious? Or had he been complicit by silence? Rick Harrison was not just a father. He was the figure who led both the family and the business. His influence was immense, his presence constant. Many began to question how such a central figure could commit so many atrocities without anyone nearby noticing. The impending trial added more fuel to the fire. The Harrison family found themselves under constant media scrutiny. Their every movement watched, analyzed, and criticized. Cameras followed them everywhere, hoping to catch any glimpse of guilt or confession. Rick's wife and Corey became targets of suspicion. Some believed they were simply victims of Rick's manipulation, while others saw them as willing enablers. They had lived and worked beside him for years. How could they have been so blind? The fallout extended to the once celebrated show, Pawn Stars. The program, once beloved by millions, faced a massive backlash. Fans were outraged, feeling tricked and betrayed. Many swore off the show entirely, unable to reconcile the joyful entertainment it once provided with the horror now attached to its name. Under immense pressure, producers had no choice but to cancel the show, marking a bitter end to what had been a pop culture phenomenon. But the cancellation wasn't the end. It was merely a turning point. All attention shifted to the courtroom, where Rick Harrison's fate would be decided. Would he admit guilt, deny everything, or fight tooth and nail to maintain his innocence? The prosecution continued to reveal jaw-dropping evidence, DNA ties to the victims, coded messages outlining murder plots, and testimony from former accomplices. Still, Harrison's defense team refused to give in. They challenged the FBI's methods, arguing procedural overreach and legal missteps. But their efforts took a devastating hit when the judge ruled that all the evidence would be admissible in court. It was a crushing blow for the defense, one that all but sealed the direction the trial was heading. As the courtroom drama began, the auditorium was filled with reporters, legal experts, and members of the public, all riveted by the proceedings. But this trial wasn't just a spectacle. It was a reckoning. It was about truth, justice, and confronting a shocking betrayal. The jovial, laughing man once seen on television had vanished. In his place stood a cold, methodical individual, seemingly capable of anything to protect the empire he had built. And as each day in court came to a close, only one chilling question remained: what happens next? Alongside the supposedly irrefutable evidence presented by the prosecution, the defense team introduced an entirely different narrative surrounding Rick Harrison. a man entangled in a tangled web of criminal dealings, yet never proven to have ordered or directly caused any killings. They argued that the corpses found within the mansion might have been the result of a situation spiraling out of control, or even a deliberate setup orchestrated by a hidden force bent on cornering Harrison. The defense's core strategy revolved around discrediting the prosecution's witnesses. They highlighted the fact that many of these individuals had long-standing personal disputes with Harrison, or may have been coerced or influenced by the investigative authorities. Furthermore, the defense cast doubts on the forensic procedures, implying that mistakes might have occurred, and asserting that the bodies found could not definitively be connected to their client, contrary to the prosecution's claims. The courtroom drama unfolded rapidly, leaving spectators breathless. Throughout the trial, Rick Harrison, who initially maintained a calm and composed demeanor, gradually began showing signs of emotional and physical wear. The strength he displayed in the early stages faded, revealing a man being chipped away by unrelenting courtroom pressure. Despite the defense's attempts to sow doubt, the prosecution continued building its case with clarity and confidence. They presented logical arguments reinforced by forensic data, eyewitness accounts, and even decrypted communications. The tension peaked when Harrison took the witness stand, a daring yet unavoidable move. In his testimony, Rick admitted to involvement in questionable business practices, but firmly denied any participation in acts of murder. He portrayed himself as a target of an elaborate smear campaign, meant to ruin the very legacy he had fought so hard to build. However, the prosecution wasted no time exploiting the inconsistencies in his statements. They meticulously cross-referenced his testimony against physical evidence, DNA samples, coded texts, and statements from former colleagues. Under this relentless interrogation, Harrison's self-assurance crumbled. His confidence eroded, leaving behind a man visibly shaken and consumed by uncertainty. As the trial neared its conclusion, the jury faced an agonizing decision. They had to assess the compelling forensic evidence and consistent witness statements against the possibility that Rick Harrison was merely a pawn, manipulated, taken advantage of, or tragically misguided. While the defense had managed to plant seeds of doubt, the ultimate question lingered. Was that doubt substantial enough to dismantle the prosecution's solid case? After days of intense deliberation, the decisive moment finally arrived. The courtroom fell into a suffocating silence. All attention shifted to the judge. Rick Harrison sat motionless, eyes distant, clinging to the faintest spark of hope. No one in the room dared to breathe. Then the verdict was read aloud. A swift, irrevocable blow to a man once adored by the masses. Rick Harrison's life had veered onto an entirely new path. Regardless of whether the charges were ultimately justified or not, the once gleaming aura surrounding his name had evaporated. What remained was a legacy marred by scandal, regret, and one of the most dramatic downfalls in the history of reality television. The courtroom, which had been the battleground for weeks of fierce argument, delivered a verdict that shocked the public to its core. Once praised as a role model, reality star, and family man, Rick Harrison was now at the heart of a scandal that captivated and horrified audiences. With the jury convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, he was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and for leading a complex criminal network. Testimonies from former partners, the gruesome discoveries inside the mansion, and the underlying thread of illicit activities pointed to one chilling conclusion. Harrison wasn't just involved. He orchestrated it all, using his television fame as a cloak to conceal the unimaginable. As the judge read out the verdict, the atmosphere grew stifling. The Harrison family sat in stunned disbelief. Corey Big Hoss, Rick's son, was shattered by the revelation. The man he had admired and trusted implicitly had been unmasked as a criminal. A family once cherished by fans was now fractured beyond repair by the actions of the person they held most dear. The sentence was absolute: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge expressed visible outrage over the magnitude of Harrison's crimes. Once a charismatic figure walking confidently in the public eye, Rick was now restrained and escorted out of the courtroom like a disgraced figurehead. The empire he painstakingly built had crumbled to dust. The fallout was swift and merciless. The show Pawn Stars was immediately canceled. The image of Rick Harrison, once the trusted face of the franchise, could no longer be separated from the scandal that now defined him. Figures like Corey and Chumlee were swept up in the media firestorm, subjected to public judgment and intense scrutiny. In an effort to shield itself from the wreckage, the TV network severed all ties with the brand. Although not directly implicated, those closest to Harrison found themselves adrift. Some attempted to publicly defend themselves, while others retreated into silence. Yet the shame was overwhelming, rendering their efforts futile. For Corey, bearing the burden of being the child of a convicted murderer was an emotional mountain he struggled to climb. His media appearances turned from promotional tours to desperate pleas for understanding and forgiveness. Rick's wife, who had stood by him for years, also faced the devastating aftermath. The man she had trusted, the partner she had built a life with, was revealed to be someone she never truly knew. Though she chose not to speak publicly, the spotlight followed her everywhere, filled with both pity and suspicion. The families of the victims, meanwhile, remained haunted by grief. The court proceedings reopened painful wounds, shedding light on the brutal realities their loved ones endured. While the verdict offered a semblance of justice, it could never replace what was lost. The sorrow lingered, and the path to healing remained long and uncertain. Rick Harrison's story is more than just the collapse of a TV celebrity. It's a glaring reminder of how fragile fame truly is. When the lights dim and the applause fades, the truth rises. Once celebrated as a beacon of entrepreneurial success, Harrison now embodies betrayal, the inescapable shadow that fame could never fully hide. Pawn Stars, once a symbol of the American dream and business savvy, is now tainted, a bittersweet memory of what once was. Even though the final judgment has been delivered, the emotional scars left behind for both the Harrison family and those devastated by his crimes will take much longer to heal. What are your thoughts on Rick Harrison's unbelievable downfall? Drop your comments below. And if you're interested in uncovering more shocking stories behind the scenes, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next.